Well, we've enjoyed this book and we've enjoyed discussing it. It's been very different. It was very different for us to discuss this. We were just curious about a lot of different things, but I thought maybe we would first ask you just to just talk to us a little bit about your research and what made you choose Alice, and just some of the history behind what were the implications that Lewis Carroll might have been a pedophile, and we were very curious about these young girls spending time with these grown men. These were just some of the things we were talking about, and just thought maybe you could just
Okay, I'll do my best. A couple things. I have a time limit. I have to be done by 7:30.
Okay.
My internet's been a little sketchy today. I don't know if it's the heat or what, so hopefully it'll last.
Okay.
Also, it's been a long time since I've written that book. And I've written 2 more since then, and starting my 3rd. So I will apologize. My memory is not as sharp as it used to be regarding my process and the history and everything about this book, but I'll try my best. I do have to ask, which version are you reading, the hardcover or the paperback?
I read the hardcover.
Okay, in the paperback, a lot of those questions are answered. They always ask authors when they're preparing the paperback, which tends to be the book, the version of the book that is used more widely by book clubs. They always ask us to include additional material, and much of the information I included in the paperback of Alice pretty much answered many of the questions you just said. So again, I'll do my best to remember them. But as I did say, even in the hardcover version of the book, the reason why I wrote it was simply because I happened to see an exhibit of Lewis Carroll's photography. I wasn't a fan of Alice. I had Alice in Wonderland. I didn't know anything about Lewis Carroll. I knew nothing of any of the history surrounding the writing of this book. I just happened to be at the Art Institute of Chicago one day, and there was a traveling exhibit called Dreaming in Pictures, the photography of Lewis Carroll. And I walked into the room, and like many modern eyes, at least, looking at all these photographs gathered, which not all, but the majority of were young girls, it was startling, to say the least, and it piqued my curiosity. I did not immediately go to an uncomfortable place about it. I was just curious to know more, and as I looked around at these photographs, I came upon the one of Alice Little at 7, dressed as the beggar child, and it startled me, that photograph. Again, it wasn't anything to do with her costume or any of that. It was her face that just really spoke to me. Her face seemed to be so out of time and out of place, very modern in a way, the expression in her eyes as she was looking at the man behind the camera. And the caption told me that this was 7-year-old Alice Little, whose father was the dean of Christ Church, where Charles Dodgson taught, and that she was the inspiration for Alice in Wonderland. And as I said, I didn't know until that moment there'd ever been a real little girl named Alice. So I was very curious to know really what the relationship was between this muse and the artist, because I immediately understood it gave us not only Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but it gave us this very startling photograph, too. So then I wish I could say I went right home and wrote it, because I did find myself wondering what happened to her, after she grew up, after she left Wonderland behind. I didn't actually write the book for at least another year. I'm foggy on the details, I'm afraid, but it was at least a year before. A friend told me, book you need to write. Oh, connection problem. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. No, we can't. Yes.
Okay, little bubble popped up saying there was an internet connection problem. So when I started to research just the basic facts about them, I immediately found out there's been a lot written about Lewis Carroll, or Charles Dodgson, and Alice Little. All of it's speculation, because we don't know to this day what the nature of the relationship was, or the nature of the break between them. All we know is that there was a break. It led to the portions of his diary being deleted. It led to her mother burning letters in Alice's possession. But beyond that, that's all we know. There have been a lot of theories about Lewis Carroll through the century and a half since he wrote that book. A lot of people talk about the drug theory. Was he taking drugs when he wrote Alice? And I was surprised to find out when I was researching this that theory only came along in the 1960s. Surprise, surprise, right? When the drug culture became very, very prevalent. So I thought that was interesting. There certainly are people who speculate he was a pedophile. There were certainly people who say he was not, just as adamantly. There certainly was already a novel written about them, which did make their relationship much more of a predator-victim. I didn't want to write that book. Why would I write that book? It had already been written. I wanted to write a different twist on the story, and that's the beauty of fiction. I chose the story because of all the unanswered questions, and because of the fact that 150 years later, we still want to know what happened, even though we never will know. And so that was what attracted me to the story right there. As I did research Dodgson and Alice, and I did research Dodgson only the parts of his life that were relevant to the book, because I never forgot that this was Alice's story, not his. And I wanted to see, we only could know enough about him as she would know in that time. I came to see their relationship as a very tragic and beautiful thing, but not at all a sexual thing, not at all a predator-victim thing. I couldn't see a victim in that photograph of Alice Little. Even at 7, she didn't look like a victim to me. I grew to find Dodgson very tragic in a way. I don't think he was sexual in any way at all. I don't think it was physical in any way. I think he was very uncomfortable with physical contact. I felt he was very lonely and sadly didn't have many friends at Oxford. And Alice herself was that way too. The kind of the ugly stepsister among her two sisters and her, the child who was a nuisance, misunderstood. And it seemed to me that they saw something in each other, and that made them both feel special and loved. That it was tragic, however, that it happened at exactly the wrong time in their lives. If it had happened 10 years later, it would have maybe had an entirely different outcome. Who knows? But then again, we probably wouldn't have Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So I looked at it as a love story in a way, but not a physical one in any way. I do think in Victoria, we have to put ourselves in the context of Victorian times and the photography of that time, that it wasn't considered at all unusual that he photographed children. It was actually, he was one of the first people to have a camera at Oxford, period. So like most early practitioners of photography, many of his early photographs were just of landscapes, things that stood still. Most of his photographs were taken during the summertime because that was when the light was the strongest, because there was no artificial light. They had to hold that pose for almost a minute for the plate to be exposed. So not a lot of people were photographing people, let alone children. And this was an era when children were highly prized. We call it today the Victorian cult of the child. It was very possible for a Victorian to look at a photograph or a picture, a painting of a child in robes or scarves, even nudes. There were some nudes, not just that Dodgson took, but that other people depicted of children in the Victorian time. They wouldn't see it sexually. They would see it as a cherub or something out of Rubens, an idealized version of the soul in a way. That was very much a part of their culture. So that Dodgson's photographs of children, and he took photographs of boys too. The reason he didn't take as many was that they simply weren't around as much. They were off at boarding school. It was the girls who were left at home with the governesses, His photographs were prized, for his depiction of children. Even the one of Alice in the robes, she's depicting what was a fable of some kind that we really don't remember today, but at the time would have been something they would have known, would have been taught in the schoolroom maybe. So she's enacting a role. Again, it's not a sexual role, and they would not have seen it that way. But 150 years later, in an age of Amber Alert and stranger danger, we do sometimes, unfortunately, see it differently. So as a novelist, there's only so much I can do to explain to the reader all this without making it become not a novel. Alice can't step out of her own story and explain, back in my time we did this and this, So what I always hope with historical fiction in general is that the reader will be inspired to want to know more about the era and the people and the customs. And I do think the best historical fiction does do that. It inspires someone to go off and research on their own. So I hope I answered your questions.
Very much so. That was very, very interesting because you're right. I think we are looking at it from our time.
Yeah.
And it's very helpful for you to explain that about the Victorian time.
And we can't help but look at it through our eyes. I mean, that's just natural. And certainly, when I was writing the book, I was aware that it was a highly discussable book, and that in certain parts of it, I chose language deliberately intended to provoke a reaction in the reader, to provoke discussion. The worst thing we can do today is write a book that nobody wants to talk about, and believe me, I've done that before, and that's not fun. So yeah, I think it's on my part as the author to provoke some uncomfortable feelings and discussion, but never to go over the line. That was my intention.
Yes.